It's around us everywhere, and increasingly, we're seeing it in everyday devices that just a decade or so ago would have seemed like pure science fiction. Communication, information, data. We live in a society today that is inundated with communication or access to information, from the cars we drive that are designed to include GPS and OnStar emergency access and broadband internet. And let's not forget automatic Bluetooth access to our cell phones. But just a few short decades ago, say in the 1970s, about the only thing you could find in most automobiles for entertainment value or communication was the AM radio. Since the introduction of radio in the 1920s, AM was it. It came before television and 8-track tape players, cassettes, and CDs. Outside of newspapers and magazines, which required many hours to produce, and in some cases, days, radio was nearly instant. Speed of light instant, with crucial information the public needed to be informed about the local, national, and world news that shaped their lives.
The island of Oahu in the Pacific, one of the most thickly populated islands of the Hawaiian group, was attacked by Japanese planes this morning, starting at about 8 o'clock. No one would believe when reports emanated from the two radio stations here that the islands had...
Radio stations were largely independently owned and highly competitive to outdo each other in providing the most up-to-the-minute information to their listeners.
We interrupt this program to bring you more news from the WRVA radio newsroom relative to tonight's plane crash about 2 miles southeast of Byrd Field. First of all, we report that there are two known survivors at this time, both members of the plane's crew. They are at MCD
In fact,
Hospital.
It wasn't until President Jimmy Carter's administration in the late 1970s that the radio industry was deregulated, allowing one owner to control many stations in local markets, and the killing of the law requiring them to carry news and local information. While both changes drastically reduced news heard on U.S. radio stations, New York news veteran John Ogle says the real problem came from owners who could now control many radio stations.
Multiple ownership is where the problem is in terms of the quality of local radio programming, particularly in news.
The problem, he says, is that station owners who are no longer required to carry news and information now carry mostly syndicated content that has nothing to do with local information needs.
Radio stations don't have the capability to report on an emergency basis.
And that can affect me and you, according to Ogle. If there is a crisis, he feels local radio news may not be prepared to update us for safety.
If a hurricane comes, you have trouble finding a place on the dial that has news about the hurricane. And if they did have the time to do the work, they don't know how to do the work because they don't have a news department anymore.
Then how accurate can the news be when there's no longer a system in place to report it live? As for John Ogle, of all the stories he has reported over the years, including world events, wars, and the deaths of presidents, perhaps the most important live story he ever covered?
I guess for my time in Manhattan, the death of John Lennon would have to be the time that I think everybody on the radio station that I worked for was doing an amazing job of gauging the mood of the listeners, keeping them really, really well informed, and also giving them a place to voice their upset.
This is WNEW-FM in New York. I'm Vince Skelsa. Dave Herman is with me.
John Ogle is live at the Dakota, Vin.
John?
Yes.
Yes, hi, John. We're on the air. I'm here, and Dave Herman is here as well. And you're on the air right now at the Dakota?
Right. I'm outside of the Dakota, the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. There's a crowd of maybe 150, 200 people standing outside of the building, silently looking into the courtyard where John Lennon was shot about an hour ago. The police are having a little bit of a problem controlling the traffic right now. Most of the people are just sort of standing and looking and not saying anything, not saying much of anything at all to each other or to the policemen who are trying to get some kind of a lead on exactly what happened.
The next time you hear of a catastrophe in some other place, ask yourself, if it happens here and my personal communications don't work, where will local radio be?
This is John Daly speaking from the CBS newsroom in New York.
WEAF, NBC.